Every day, I sit on my desk and I work. And every day, as I stare out of my window, something catches my eye. On the hill in the distance, there is a dark church. The old building is oppressing, even the birds shun it. But something pulls me there. I have to investigate. I must find out what lurks under the steeple. In November of 1935, Howard Phillips Lovecraft wrote The Haunter of the Dark. It should be the last tale that he would write on his own. Published a year later, Lovecraft would die only a couple of months after its release. He left us a dark and brooding tale that, especially when taking a closer look, doesn't leave much to be desired. So let's dive straight in. Now, before we start, there's a short disclaimer. First, the story itself is not divided into chapters, but I divided it myself so it's more easily digestible. But in the original, the story doesn't have chapters, and the chapters also don't have names. It's just, I made it up so it's easier for us. We also have a really cool new shirt that I'm wearing right now. And there will be way more talk about this later, of course. But you can buy it in the store together with the Wendigo shirt that we made for the last video. I would also really like to thank you all so much for the support and all the comments, all the interest in what we're doing here. So thank you all so much. It really means a lot. Yeah, let's go right in. Chapter 1, The Artist. The story starts off with a couple of verses from a poem that Lovecraft once wrote. It's called Nemesis. I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. The Haunter of the Dark begins at the end. We hear about Robert Bloch, who was apparently killed by lightning or some other electrical accident. But it doesn't all make sense. The window that he faced when he died is still in one piece, but nature, sometimes produces freak accidents, and the horrible expression on his face could be due to some muscular cramps that arose during his death when he was electrocuted. It is surely not related to anything that he saw at that moment, and the diary entries he left behind must come from his imagination. But you have to admit, it is all a bit connected to the deserted and anomalous church on Federal Hill. Apparently, Blake was an artist, a painter. His interest in myths, dreams, horror, and supernatural led him to visit a strange old man in the city. The man, also interested in occultism and the like, then would later burn in a fire. But some investigators who look at this case have less rational theories. They are inclined to take much of Blake's diary at its face value and point significantly to certain facts such as the undoubted genuineness of the old church record, the verified existence of the disliked and unorthodox Stary Wisdom sect prior to 1877, the recorded disappearance of an inquisitive reporter named Edwin M. Lillibridge in 1893, and above all, the look of monstrous, transfiguring fear on the face of the young writer when he died. It was one of these believers who, moved to fanatical extremes, threw into the bay the curiously angled stone and its strangely adorned metal box, found in the old church steeple, the black, windowless steeple, and not the tower where Blake's diary said those things originally were. Though widely censored, both officially and unofficially, this man, a reputable physician with a taste for odd folklore, averred that he had rid the earth of something too dangerous to rest upon it. Now let us look at the case, go through the diary and other sources, and at the end of it, you shall judge for yourself what you think happened. It is winter of 1934, Providence. Robert Bloch takes up residence in the upper floor in the venerable house off College Street, on the great eastward hill near the Brown University campus and behind the marble John Hay Library. Side note here, this house is actually the Samuel D. Mumford House, which was originally built in 1825 at 66 College Street in Providence, and Lovecraft actually lived there, in the room that is described in the story. It was actually his final residence. Here you can see a picture of the house. Apparently, this is almost a one-to-one representation of what the house looked like back then. It is actually a very lovely house if you look at it. It's old, but it's cozy. The garden is described as a little oasis where huge but friendly cats lie in the sun. Blake's study overlooks the front garden on the southern side, while the window on the west side faces down the hill and a splendid view of the lower town's outspread roofs and of the mystical sunsets that flamed behind them. On the far horizon were the open countryside's purple slopes. Against these, some 2 miles away, rose the spectral hump of Federal Hill, bristling with huddled roofs and steeples whose remote outlines wavered mysteriously, taking fantastic forms as the smoke of the city swirled up and enmeshed them. Blake had a curious sense that he was looking upon some unknown, ethereal world, which might or might not vanish in dream if ever he tried to seek it out and enter it in person. I already love this setting. It is very picturesque and a bit like, when you play Bloodborne or Elden Ring or one of those games and you enter a cool new area and then you see up in the distance a very interesting place on the horizon. And that place is going to be very important later in the game. Like, for example, the church tower in Bloodborne, where then later Maria is. Blake brings with him some antique furnitures and art supplies. He lives alone in his rooms. The young artist immediately starts writing and painting. During that first winter, he produced 5 of his best-known short stories. The Burrower Beneath, The Stairs in the Crypt, Shagai, In the Vale of Pnath, and The Feaster from the Stars, and painted 7 canvases, studies of nameless, unhuman monsters and profoundly alien, non-terrestrial landscapes. The fictional titles in the story are of course nods to real stories that Lovecraft read or wrote himself, stories of the time, the weird stories, for example. Pnath is mentioned in The Doom That Came to Sarnath and in Lovecraft's Randolph Carter stories. Shagai is a planet that would later be used in the Lovecraft Circle. I personally tend to imagine Robert Blake's paintings in the way that, for example, the Polish artist Beksinski paints. This otherworldly, intensely aesthetic, dreamlike art style. By the way, Beksinski and Lovecraft are both big inspirations for the 2020 horror movie The Empty Man. I seriously suggest to check it out. At sunset, he would often sit at his desk and gaze dreamily off at the outspread west, the dark towers of Memorial Hall just below the Georgian courthouse belfry, the lofty pinnacles of the downtown section, and that shimmering, spire-crowned mound in the distance, whose unknown street and labyrinthine gables so potently provoked his fancy. Federal Hill in the distance is a district with lots of Italians. Sometimes Robert takes his binoculars and then he studies the house and rooftops. They seem dreamlike, almost alien and unreal. The object that piques his interest the most is a huge and dark church. It stood out with a special distinctness at certain hours of the day, and at sunset the great tower and tapering steeple loomed blackly against the flaming sky. It seemed to rest on especially high ground, for the grimy facade and the obliquely seen north side with sloping roof and the tops of great pointed windows rose boldly above the tangle of surrounding ridge poles and chimney pots. Peculiarly grim and austere, it appeared to be built of stone, stained and weathered with the smoke and storms of a century and more. The style, so far as the glass could shew, was that earliest experimental form of Gothic revival, which preceded the stately Upjohn period, and held over some of the outlines and proportions of the Georgian age. Perhaps it was reared around 1810 or 1815. Not sorry for reading such big parts of the story, but those descriptions are so beautiful and evoking. Now, the church was built before the Upjohn period. Richard Upjohn, who lived in the 19th century, was an architect and designed many churches that were revivals of the Gothic period. And more importantly, the church that we get to hear about here for the first time is St. John's Catholic Church. It was built in 1871 on Atwell's Avenue, and it was destroyed in 1992. In 1935, its steeple was destroyed by lightning during a storm. This event definitely inspired Lovecraft to write this story. So yeah, fragile and mentally unstable person finds a creepy church that they feel drawn to.
Okay, let's go.
Over the months, Blake is more and more interested in the church that looms in the distance. There is never any light in the windows. It has to be vacant. His mind starts to spin, make up stories of the place. The flocks of pigeons and crows rest on all the rooftops, but they never rest on the church's rooftop. He tells his friends about the ominous church, but nobody really cares. Then spring comes around, and the young artist finally starts writing a novel, something he has planned for a long time. But his creative process is disrupted again and again by the hypnotic grip of the church. That gorilla grip of the church. Late in April, just before Walpurgis Night, which we have again, if you remember Dunwich Horror, he finally makes the decision to check out Federal Hill and the church himself. At first, Robert is disoriented as he walks through the endless streets around Federal Hill. He never sees any of the landmarks that he spotted when he looked through the binoculars. Now it feels even more dreamlike. From time to time, he finds a church, but it is never the blackened pile that he sought. He even asks the locals, but they all just smile and just shake their heads, and he can swear that there is more to their expression, that they hide fear. One of them even makes a curious sign with his hand. And then, finally, he sees the tower in the distance. This was the end of his quest, for upon the wide, iron-railed, weed-grown plateau which the wall supported, lesser world raised fully 6 feet above the surrounding streets. There stood a grim Titan bulk whose identity, despite Blake's new perspective, was beyond dispute. The vacant church was in a state of great decrepitude. Some of the high stone buttresses had fallen, and several delicate finials lay half lost among the brown, neglected weeds and grasses. The sooty Gothic windows were largely unbroken, though many of the stone mullions were missing. Blake wondered how the obscurely painted panes could have survived so well in view of the known habits of small boys the world over. The massive doors were intact and tightly closed. Around the top of the bank wall, fully enclosing the grounds, was a rusty iron fence, whose gate, at the head of a flight of steps from the square, was visibly padlocked. The path from the gate to the building was completely overgrown. Desolation and decay hung like a pall above the place, and in the birdless eaves and black, ivyless walls, Blake felt a touch of the dimly sinister beyond his power to define. Desolation and decay hung like a pall above the place. This is so hot. Let's go. So we have a creepy Gothic church that the locals don't want to talk about and don't want anybody to visit, and the animals shun it. That is always a good sign that a place is, healthy and jolly. And as you can imagine, there are not many people in the square around the church. There is, however, a policeman, an Irishman to be more concise. This is going to be more important later. So he may not be in cahoots with the local Italians, and he might even give up some information. At first, the policeman doesn't want to talk as well. He just makes the sign of the cross. But Robert presses on, and so the policeman spills the beans. The Italian priests always warn everybody against the building. Don't even speak about it. A monstrous evil had once dwelt there and left its mark. He himself had heard dark whispers of it from his father, who recalled certain sounds and rumors from his boyhood. So once there had been an evil sect that summoned dark things in the church. Only a good priest managed to exorcise the thing that they had called up in the night. Some others say that only the light could do the trick. In 1877, there is talk of people vanishing now and then in the area. The owners of the church had died or ran away since that time. Now, the city owns the church. The plan is that nobody touches it and time will just take care of the place. One day it will fall apart naturally. Blake is excited that he's not the only one who is fascinated with the dark building. He wonders about the stories. It's probably just legends and folklore, right? But even so, they were like a strange coming to life of one of his own stories. So he feels like it's connected to the creative things that go on in himself. Like artists often feel like they're merely a vessel for what comes out, for what they put on the canvas or on the page. Remember that for later. The sun comes out behind the clouds, illuminating the beautiful city, but it feels like it doesn't manage to light up the old church. Blake realizes that the fenced yard around the church also doesn't hold any kind of green. Spring is in full progress, but not a single green leaf is there to find. The artist can't resist. He has to find a way in, because he's such a smart person to, Why do we always have to do that? Why? He has to find a way in. He finds a gap in the north side of the fence and crawls in. Remember, the church is on a sort of plateau that is pretty high. Once inside, he looks down onto the plaza. The few people in the square, they have also noticed him, and they edge away. They make the same mysterious sign that the shopkeeper had made. Windows are being slammed. The mother runs into the street and pulls her kids inside. Blake finds himself amidst the rotting, tangled growths of the deserted yard. There are a few worn stumps of headstones, so this used to be a small cemetery a very long time ago. The atmosphere of the church is oppressive, now that he is so close. He gathers his spirit and then, one after the other, tries the 3 great doors, but nothing. They're locked. Robert isn't sure what to do. He feels like it's a very bad place. The doy. But this pull just drags him further. End of chapter 1. I'm gonna eat cake now. What's up, Carnival? You probably wonder what this is. This is my parents' attic. So this is the attic that my parents have a big house, and this is the attic. And I thought of making the video here because it's pretty fitting to the story, because it's also, we're not going down, we're going up in this story. And this place in particular is very important to me because it's a bit of a personal story. You can see back there the target, and this is quite a long attic. And during the pandemic, a good friend of my mother was in terminal cancer, and I was actually having really big mental health issues. Like, I had the mental health issues before the pandemic started. Basically, everything was the worst ever in my life. And I was on, meds, and I was super overweight, and whole horror show. And then Corona hit. And while all of this happened, he knew everything beforehand, but he moved in he moved in here because he was going to be his final weeks. And my mother, because she's such an angel, I guess, she said, you know what, before you do all of this alone in your shitty apartment, just live with us, and we have a beautiful garden, and we just take care of you until it's over. And oh boy, this is a bit whatever. And so he moved in here, and the doctors gave him a time frame of, okay, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, maybe you get a month, right? That was in the fall of 2020. And somehow the doctors, he was going back to the doctors, and he had a palliative nurse. I hope it's the same word in English, like a terminal end stage nurse crew, and doctors that took care of him. And he was here with us, and he was celebrating Christmas with us, and he was really happy that basically his whole life was very difficult, and for him this was the first time that he was able to celebrate Christmas with an actual family. And there were times where we were together as a family, and I felt like, oh, this is family, this sucks, but because everybody's fighting a bit and everything. And he was still so happy because for him it was, hey, we're all sitting together. Like, that was already for him so much more family than he ever had. And I always felt like an ass after that, because afterward it was always like, oh, this was such a nice experience that everybody's just sitting together and having pizza. And for me, it was like, oh, like, it's just the same stupid family stuff as always. And it kind of taught me gratitude. And he was he was many things in his life, but he was also shooting bow and arrow. And it was the winter, it was super cold, and I was worst ever, and he was, hey, why don't I teach you how to shoot a bow? And we were like, but how are we going to do this? You can't really leave the house because you're so sick. And then we figured out, well, this is the attic has enough distance, right? The attic is long enough to start. This is like, it goes a bit beyond the camera. So it's like 10 meters, 15 meters. There's actually marks on the floor. Like where I'm standing is 10 meters, and then over there is 15 meters, and that's enough for a beginner when it comes to shooting bow and arrow. And he went up with me up here when it was -5 degrees, and we made it a bit nice with the table, and he would tell me how to shoot a bow and arrow up here. And that's the target that we used. And the doctors and nurses, they were telling him, you know what, it's gonna be over soon, a couple of weeks. But then he actually made it till Christmas. And then it just kept happening, and he just made it almost, I think he made it more than a year here. And we had, of course, many serious talks, and it was I met him, and where there was this thing where you talk to somebody and you look them in the eye, and it was, hey, there is somebody there who's very real and who's very much there, and there is a connection. And so I had like a split second where it was like, if I decide to be a friend with this person, then I have to go with him the whole whatever it's gonna be, but this is gonna be over soon, so do or don't. And I was like, well, I have to. Either, like, this is my friend now. And then we were friends for a year. Yeah, this is this got more personal than I wanted, but that's why I'm doing it here, because I've spent time with him here. Oh boy. So there's also the what do you call it, like the chimney outlets up here, so there's rust everywhere, which also fits very much with the story. And there's just weird stuff up here where you walk around and you find a piece of iron where you're like, what is this, why is it here? So it fits very much with the story. Yeah, super dusty. There's also a Mastodon poster, there's also a Sabaton poster over there, and then there's like, I'll get it, it's one of the original Absinthe advertisements, I guess. And I really like the Art Nouveau. I hope it's Art Nouveau. It's the Art Nouveau, the whole Bioshock, like that whole era. I'm sorry, it's difficult for me to talk right now. I'll just put it back there. Like that was part of making this place nice, stuff like that. So there's also an arrow that I never found. Like every arrow I found, it's in the target, and one is somewhere in the attic. There's an arrow somewhere in the attic that went somewhere, I don't know. There's also, a lot of ferrets up here at night. Like my sister, she also lives in the house, like in a different section. It's an old, big, rural side house. And she often can hear the ferrets do things at night on top. Through the ceiling, she can hear them run around, and there's also bats, and all the things are up here. So yes, that was a very personal story, and I would like to continue with chapter 2. Chapter 2. Exploring the church on Federal Hill, he finds an unprotected cellar window, and after making sure it's safe, he crawls inside. Everything that he's doing feels a little bit without conscious initiative, like he has been following something or somebody, like in a trance. There's this pool. There is a hot air furnace in the basement telling him that the building had been used and kept in shape as late as mid-Victorian times. The concrete floor in the vaulted cellar is dust-carpeted and debris strewn. There are no partitions. Robert Bloch puts an old barrel next to the window so that he has a quick escape route if he needs it. Then he braces himself and heads towards an archway that evidently leads upstairs. The man feels oppressed now that he is within the great spectral building. The air is, of course, full of dust and cobwebs. Realizing that he forgot any kind of light, he uses his hands to carefully find the way upstairs, which of course will make him very dirty, and he comes very in contact with the church, like physically. The way ahead, it holds a closed door, but he manages to open it in the dark somehow. Beyond is a dimly illumined corridor lined with worm-eaten paneling. All doors on the ground floor are unlocked, and he immediately starts exploring the ancient church. The colossal nave was an almost eldritch place, with its drifts and mountains of dust, over box pews, altar, hourglass, pulpit, and sounding board, and its titanic ropes of cobweb, stretching among the pointed arches of the gallery and entwining the clustered Gothic columns. Over all this hushed desolation played a hideous leaden light as the declining afternoon sun sent its rays through the strange half-blackened panes of the great apsidal windows. Man, I can absolutely imagine what it looks like in there. This is a place that I would personally 100% go check out with my friends. We're gonna wear headlamps and shit, and just never the fuck go alone in one of those places. Like 0%. No, don't go into one of those places alone. Go there with friends. It's also gonna be more fun. It's more safe and more fun. And don't destroy anything or steal anything big. Just explore the place and take some pictures. If you find like a cool rusty screw or whatever, I guess you can take that, but leave it as it is for the next person. It's called urban exploration. There are paintings on the windows, but they are obscured by so many layers of soot. Blake can't see what they represent. He only knows that he doesn't like what he sees. Like, he can figure it out so much that he's like, nope. The designs were largely conventional, and his knowledge of obscure symbolism told him much concerning some of the ancient patterns. The few saints depicted bore expressions distinctly open to criticism, while one of the windows seemed to shew merely a dark space with spirals of curious luminosity scattered about in it. Turning away from the windows, Blake noticed that the cobwebbed cross above the altar was not of the ordinary kind, but resembled the primordial ankh or crux ansata of shadowy Egypt. Now we are heading into occult and eldritch territory. The crux ansata, the primordial ankh. You probably just know it as an ankh. It's this thing. You've seen it in probably any Hollywood movie that shows more than 10 seconds of Egypt. The background is, it's a hieroglyph that means, among other things, life. We don't know what it definitely means. Of course, there is life or afterlife, immortality or vitality, but there is also the idea that it is the combination of the male and female symbols, meaning the fruit of life. Now, there is actually an ankh also in Christianity. That's what it is called, the crux ansata. It is very similar to the staurogram, an ankh that has the loop facing to the right side, like a P letter, rather than the whole circle. The staurogram, or crux ansata, are said to symbolize Jesus Christ. So, long story short, there is a cross above the altar that is not traditional, or too traditional, I guess, for a church of that age. And the paintings and symbols are all very bad. Let's just say it as it is. This is not a good place. But Blake explores it further. Again, he has this pull that makes him do it. In a rear vestry room beside the apse, Blake found a rotting desk and ceiling-high shelves of mildewed, disintegrated books. The apse is the round part at the end of the big hall in the church, and the vestry is a room that holds all the things that are used during the ceremonies in the church. You can guess where this goes. They were the black, forbidden things which most sane people have never even heard of, or have heard of only in furtive, timorous whispers, the banned and dreaded repositories of equivocal secrets and immemorial formulae, which have trickled down the stream of time from the days of man's youth, and the dim, fabulous days before man was. He had himself read many of them, a Latin version of the abhorred Necronomicon, the sinister Liber Ivonis, the infamous Culte de Ghoul of Comte de Urlet, the unaussprechlichen Kulten of Junst, and old Ludwig Prince hellish de Vermes Mysteries. But there were others he had known merely by reputation, or not at all. The narcotic manuscripts, the Book of Gian, and a crumbling volume in wholly unidentifiable characters, yet with certain symbols and diagrams shudderingly recognizable to the occult student. Clearly, the lingering local rumors had not lied. This place had once been the seat of an evil older than mankind and wider than the known universe. Now, this is not the first story we're dealing with. I don't need to tell you that these forbidden books are seen in many other Cthulhu Mythos stories, and they're actually in the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. But what is new here is the Book of Gian. I hope I pronounced it correctly. It only appears in one other Lovecraft story, The Diary of Alonzo Typer from 1935. It was published years later, so it wasn't published in 1935. It is a collaboration, or it may be more of a rewrite, of a story of William Lumley. In it is written, I learned of the Book of Gian, whose first 6 chapters antedate the Earth, and which was old when the lords of Venus came through space in their ships to civilize our planet. I gotta say, I didn't know about that story. I still find new Lovecraft stories that he co-wrote with others, but that he ghost wrote for somebody else. So what is the Book of Gian? It is a real text, or let's say it is a real legend at least, from Tibet. It is the basis for Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine, which she wrote in 1888, one of the foundational books of the Theosophical movement. The book now also found its way into occultism, into UFO and ancient astronaut theories, and the whole bubble. The Book of Gian is now disregarded as a hoax, but Blavatsky claimed that it is real. According to Blavatsky, she saw the manuscript, which was guarded by an occult brotherhood while studying esoteric doctrines in Tibet. It was written on a collection of palm leaves, made impermeable to water, fire, and air by some specific unknown process. The language that they use is the Zenzar, which is an otherwise unknown language that may be Atlantean in origin. The word Gian, according to Blavatsky, is pronounced Gian or Jan, and it signifies to reform oneself by meditation and knowledge. In her account, the book relates, among other things, the origins of humanity on the lost continents of Hyperborea, Lemuria, and Atlantis. Blavatsky said that much of the information in her major work, The Secret Doctrine from 1888, derived from this book. Here's a quote from her. So, by the way, again, this is all Wikipedia, mostly. This first installment of the esoteric doctrines is based upon stanzas which are recorded of a people unknown to ethnology. It is claimed that they are written in a tongue absent from the nomenclature of languages and dialects, with which philology is acquainted. They are said to emanate from a source repudiated by science, meaning occultism. And finally, they are offered through an agency, incessantly discredited before the world by all those who hate unwelcome truths, or have some special hobby of their own to defend. Therefore, the rejection of these teachings may be expected and must be accepted beforehand. No one styling himself a scholar in whatever department of exact science will be permitted to regard these teachings seriously. In 1909, theosophist Charles Webster Leadbeater stated that the Book of Gian possesses occult qualities. It appears to be very highly magnetized, for as soon as man takes a page into his hand, he sees passing before his eyes a vision of the events which it is intended to portray, while at the same time he seems to hear a sort of rhythmic description of them in his own language, so far as that language will convey the ideas that are involved in here. Its pages contain no words whatever, nothing but symbols. So yeah, it is very probably definitely a made-up book that is now used by conspiracy theorists. So much of what I just said will be relevant later in the story. Just the Atlantean Hyperborean things. Lovecraft definitely used that as building blocks for the story. That's why it's not just another book, but it's actually cool that he didn't just mention it. It was like, oh, what he sometimes does is, as you remember with the decoding books in Dunwich Horror, where he goes, oh, this is just a list of books about decoding, copy paste, let's go. Here he actually found out about the book and researched it and then put those influences into the story, which is more the later Lovecraft. He was always very serious about his research, but you can see that later he was even more serious. For the first time, Robert is horrified. Searching the desk, he finds a leather-bound manuscript. Its pages contain cryptography common traditional symbols from astronomy, alchemy, and the like. There are paragraphs and divisions visible, so Robert can assume that it is just the code to cloak whatever its author needed to hide. A bit like in the Dunwich Horror, where he realizes, okay, it's going to be a diary, just in the structure it's written. So he pockets the manuscript, the arcane books are tempting him as well, but, he might return later again. He wonders now, has this place been undisturbed for what must have been almost 60 years? Is it the dark, terrifying aura, or why? Why did nobody come and take these very valuable books? He is done now with the ground floor, so Robert heads through the dark to the front of the dusty church, because there he saw a door with a staircase that he hopes will lead up to the blackened tower in the steeple. Because that's the reason he's here, right? And there is actually a staircase that leads up. The way up is a choking experience. With all the dust and spider webs filling out the narrow space, it's a spiral wooden staircase. Blake passes by clouded windows looking dizzily out over the city. He hasn't seen any ropes yet, but he is sure that there will be bells somewhere up there, because that's why you have that tower with this, that's why you have that, right? But as he arrives at the top, there are no chimes. The chamber is clearly devoted to vastly different purposes. So it was either built or restructured in its roots to fit the purposes here. It's a small chamber described as 15 feet square. I believe that it isn't 15 square feet, but that the room is 15 feet across, or 15 times 15 feet. Maybe that's because English isn't my first language, but if the room would be 15 square feet, then it would be way too small, because I need more space to record than that. That is basically the room I'm occupying is 15 square feet, so it's gonna be more than that. Each of the 4 walls has a lancet window, the long and narrow church windows. In the center of the dust-laden floor rose a curiously angled stone pillar, some 4 feet in height and 2 in average diameter, covered on each side with bizarre, crudely incised and wholly unrecognizable hieroglyphs. On this pillar rested a metal box of peculiarly asymmetrical form, its hinged lid thrown back and its interior holding what looked beneath the decade-deep dust to be an egg-shaped or irregularly spherical object, some 4 inches through. Around the pillar, in a rough circle, were 7 high-backed Gothic chairs, still largely intact, while behind them, ranging along the dark-paneled walls, were 7 colossal images of crumbling, black-painted plaster, resembling more than anything else the cryptic carven megaliths of mysterious Easter Island. In one corner of the cobweb chamber, a ladder was built into the wall, leading up to the closed trapdoor of the windowless steeple above. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty, right? This is so wonderfully spooky. We're getting into the dark, we're getting into the occult, we're getting into cult itself. And also, we're not done yet, right? There is still way more up ahead in this terrifying church. As Blake grew accustomed to the feeble light, he noticed odd bas-reliefs on the strange open box of yellowish metal. Approaching, he tried to clear the dust away with his hands and handkerchief, and saw that the figurines were of a monstrous and utterly alien kind, depicting entities which, though seemingly alive, resembled no known life form ever evolved on this planet. The 4-inch seeming sphere turned out to be a nearly black, red-striated polyhedron with many irregular flat surfaces, either a very remarkable crystal of some sort or an artificial object of carved and highly polished mineral matter. It did not touch the bottom of the box, but was held suspended by means of a metal band around its center, with 7 queerly designed supports, extending horizontally to angles of the box's inner wall near the top. This stone, once exposed, exerted upon Blake an almost alarming fascination. He could scarcely tear his eyes from it, and as he looked at its glistening surfaces, he almost fancied it was transparent, with half-formed worlds of wonder within. Into his mind floated pictures of alien orbs, with great stone towers and other orbs with Titan mountains, and no mark of life, and still remoter spaces, where only a stirring and vague blacknesses told of the presence of consciousness and will. This is amazingly written, right? This alien artifact and how it's held in a place and the chairs around it. And it's just, you will probably have seen this in many movies, right? A scene that is similar to this. After a while, Blake notices something in the corner near the ladder that goes to the steeple. He inspects the heap of dusty debris, and it turns out that it is a human skeleton. There are cloth pieces that are still intact. There's also a reporter's badge with the name of the old Providence telegram and a crumbling leather pocketbook, and, some other belongings. The cards reveal that the remains belong to a reporter named Edwin M. Lillibridge. If you remember from the beginning, he's already mentioned there. And by the way, the Providence Telegram, it was a real newspaper that was founded in 1880. There is also a paper covered in strange notes. Blake walks over to the window so he can take a look at the puzzling paper. There's not much light coming in, but he's, trying to check it out. We are about to finally get some insights about what has happened in the place. Now let me read to you a short paragraph from the beginning again. It will be important here. If you remember from the beginning about the whole investigation. They are inclined to take much of Blake's diary at its face value and point significantly to certain facts such as the undoubted genuineness of the old church record, the verified existence of the disliked and unorthodox Starry Wisdom sect prior to 1877, the recorded disappearance of an inquisitive reporter named Edwin M. Lillibridge in 1893, and, above all, the look of monstrous transfiguring fear on the face of the young writer when he died. So now to the piece of paper that he finds in the church, written by Lillibridge. Professor Enoch Bowen, home from Egypt, May 1844. Buys Old Free Will Church in July. His archaeological work and studies in occult well known. Dr. Brown of Fourth Baptist warns against starry wisdom in sermon on December 29th, 1844. Congregation 97 by end of 45. 1846, 3 disappearances. First mention of shining trapezahedron. 7 disappearances, 1848. Stories of blood sacrifice begin. Investigation, 1853. Comes to nothing. Stories of sounds. O'Malley tells of devil worship with box found in great Egyptian ruins. Says that they call up something that can't exist in light, flees a little light, and banished by strong light. Then has to be summoned again. Probably got this from deathbed confession of Francis X. Feeney, who had joined Starry Wisdom in 49. These people say the shining trapezahedron shews them heaven and other worlds, and that the haunter of the dark tells them secrets in some way. Story of Orrin B. Eddy, 1857. They call it up by gazing at the crystal and have a secret language of their own. 200 or more in congregation, 1863. Exclusive of men at front. Irish boys, mob church in 1869. After Patrick Regan's disappearance. Veiled article in June, March 14, 72. But people don't talk about it. 6 disappearances, 1876. Secret committee calls on Major Doyle. Action promised, February 1877. Church closes in April. Gang, Federal Hill Boys, threaten doctor and vestryman in May. 181 persons leave the city before end of 77. Mention no names. Ghost stories begin around 1880. Try to ascertain truth of report that no human being has entered church since 1877. Ask Lanigan for photograph of place taken 1851. I personally really enjoy these diary entries and the like when we get them in stories like this. Like when you play Amnesia or Soma or Bioshock, those games, you find diaries and letters and more that slowly show you the background of what is actually going on and how people are experiencing it while it's happening. That Professor Enoch Bowen, where is he from? There are several real-life sources and inspirations to this character. There's Charles Edwin Wilbur, a 19th century Egyptologist from Rhode Island and Brown University graduate. He traveled to Egypt after 1974, so he is actually not that fitting. Then there's the Prussian archaeologist Carl Richard Lepsius, who's known as the father of modern Egyptology. He traveled through Egypt in 1943, but then he has no connection to Rhode Island. But he is known as the first translator of the Egyptian Book of the Dead in 1842. Lovecraft actually owned a first English translation of that, and it is said that he wrote about it and studied Egyptian mythology at the early age of 6. If you might remember from the iceberg videos, maybe it's not a small spoiler, but yeah, Nyarlathotep is in this one. One of his forms is a tall, swarthy man that resembles a pharaoh. The eldritch being and the name itself actually appeared to Lovecraft in a dream, as always. but more on that later in the analysis part. Also, Major Doyle. Thomas A. Doyle was a real person and a popular Republican mayor at that time. So to summarize the whole list of events, Professor Enoch Bown apparently came back from Egypt in 1844 and he brought with him this strange artifact. Well, the word I choose might be wrong here, if you see in archaeology, an artifact is actually a general term for an item that is made or given shape by humans. And we're not so sure, right, if this thing was created by humans. We don't know who created it, the shining trapezahedron. There are soon rumors of blood sacrifices, and there is now openly a cult residing in the church in Providence. It is called the Starry Wisdom sect. The trapezahedron shows them strange things, and it is connected to the Haunter of the Dark, a being that tells them secrets. It is conjured up by staring into the crystal. Over the years, the cult grows to 200 people, and there are more and more disappearances around the whole thing, until the mayor finally closes it in 1877. After he closes it, 181 people leave the city. So almost the whole cult is gone, but some remain in the city. I like that hidden tidbit. I really tried doing the numbers to find out if it's just the 200 minus exactly the number of sacrifices, and then you get the number of people that leave. But it doesn't add up. Well, actually it kinda does. It's time for some quick maths. So 1846, you have 3 disappearances. 1848, you have 7 disappearances. In 49, Francis Feeney dies, who definitely was a member. In 69, Patrick Regan disappears, so that's 1 more. In 76, there's 6 disappearances, so that is 18 in total. And then you add the reporter, and that is exactly 181 left. But of course, the cult was 200 in between all of those numbers, after some of them have disappeared. I thought it was neat, but it doesn't really make sense. So thank you for coming with me along the red herring ride. I also love that apparently the Irish mob is the only antidote that worked against the cult, because the church and the state, they are always in on it. Remember, kids, they're always in on it, or they don't care about the afflicted and will then use it for their own means. Remember this. For your whole life. That's how it apparently works. Don't want to go conspiracy Wendigo right here, but I'm very... Watch True Detective, and I'm pretty sure that's happened more than we like. Maybe not the cult thing, but everything else. Like Epstein Island, you know what I'm talking about. This is way too real. Church and state just coming together to do fun stuff, or having horrible things happen and then use it to gain power or to justify doing horrible things. It's all about the agenda.
And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would.
So back to the story. Blake then pockets the note and the book, and then he returns to the human remains. What has happened here? There is a body. How did the man pass? Was it a heart failure? Blake stooped over the gleaming bones and noted their peculiar state. Some of them were badly scattered, and a few seemed oddly dissolved at the ends. Others were strangely yellowed, with vague suggestions of charring. This charring extended to some of the fragments of clothing. The skull was in a very peculiar state, stained yellow and with a charred aperture in the top, as if some powerful acid had eaten through the solid bone. What had happened to the skeleton during its 4 decades of silent entombment here, Blake could not imagine. So while he does this, before he can realize what's even happening, what's going on, he finds himself staring into the stone, into the trapezahedron. He saw processions of robed, hooded figures whose outlines were not human, and looked on endless leagues of desert lined with carved, sky-reaching monoliths. He saw towers and walls in nighted depths under the sea, and vortices of space where wisps of black mist floated before thin shimmerings of cold purple haze. And beyond all else, he glimpsed an infinite gulf of darkness, where solid and semi-solid forms were known only by their windy stirrings, and cloudy patterns of force seemed to superimpose order on chaos, and hold forth a key to all the paradoxes and arcana of the worlds we know. So bro just like the ones before him, stares into the artifact and starts getting visions of other dimensions and alien beings. Or is it a deeper perception of the universe? You know, it could be anything, but it's not like he does it on his own accord. The stone takes possession of him. It's like a continuation of that pull, maybe the final continuation of the pull that he felt when he was looking out the window at the church. The pull that brought him here. Suddenly, the spell of the trapezohedron of the artifact is broken by an instant burst of fear in Blake. Blake choked and turned away from the stone, conscious of some formless alien presence close to him and watching him with horrible intentness. He felt entangled with something which was not in the stone, but which had looked through it at him, something which would ceaselessly follow him with a cognition that was not physical sight. Blake also feels like it's getting dark anyway, and he has no lamp. The old, I'm not sad, I'm just really tired, bro. I swear, bro, my eyes are red because of the weed. I didn't cry, bro. He wants to go home for light reasons. Exclusively light reasons. I mean, let's be honest. There's a dead body in the corner, and there is a trans-dimensional portal stone together with a fucking alien ghost. Just get the hell out of there, bro. But the trapezohedron has more tricks up its interdimensional sleeve. It was then, in the gathering twilight, that he thought he saw a faint trace of luminosity in the crazily angled stone. He had tried to look away from it, but some obscure compulsion drew his eyes back. Was there a subtle phosphorescence of radioactivity about the thing? What was it that the dead man's notes had said concerning a shining trapezohedron? What anyway was this abandoned lair of cosmic evil? What had been done here and what might still be lurking in the bird-shunned shadows? It seemed now as if an elusive touch of feature had arisen somewhere close by, though its source was not apparent. Blake seized the cover of the long open box and snapped it down. It moved easily on its alien hinges and closed completely over the unmistakably glowing stone. Closing the box makes a sharp clicking sound. Simultaneously, a stirring sound comes from above, from the dark steeple, beyond the trapdoor. It's gotta be rats, of course. Blake is still terribly frightened, and he almost plunges down the spiral stairs through the church, through the basement, and out into the deserted square. He runs home like the devil is after him. Chapter 3. The Haunter of the Dark. In the following days, Blake keeps to himself, telling nobody what happened or where he went. He starts reading mysterious and occult books, searches through newspaper archives, and spends hours deciphering the code of the manuscript. Just like in the Dunwich Horror, it is not as easy to decipher as one wishes. During all of this, every evening, Blake still feels the urge to go to the window and look at the black church in the distance. But now the view holds a fresh terror for the young artist. He is not sure if it is his imagination, but the returning flocks of birds are not just avoiding the steeple, they're getting panicky around the church. In June, Blake manages to crack the code. The manuscript is written in the Aklo language. You remember that word from the Dunwich Horror video? If not, go watch that one video after this video. It's a good video and I'm really proud of it. But in short, the Aklo language is a fictional mystical language that is used by dark cults. We don't get to know much about what Blake deciphers. Again, all this information, or most of it is from his diary and newspaper articles. He mostly just gives us small hints in his diary. There are references to a haunter of the dark, awaked by gazing into the shining trapezohedron, and insane conjectures about the black gulfs of chaos from which it was called. The being is spoken of as holding all knowledge and demanding monstrous sacrifices. Some of Blake's entries show fear lest the thing which he seemed to regard as summon stalk abroad, though he adds that the streetlights form a bulwark which cannot be crossed. Of the shining trapezohedron he speaks often, calling it a window on all time and space, and tracing its history from the days it was fashioned on dark Yugoth, before ever the old ones brought it to earth. It was treasured and placed in its curious box by the crinoid things of Antarctica, salvaged from their ruins by the serpent men of Valusia, and peered at, eons later in Lemuria, by the first human beings. It crossed strange lands and stranger seas, and sank with Atlantis before a Minoan fissure meshed it in his net and sold it to swarthy merchants from knighted Kem. The pharaoh Neferka built around it a temple with a windowless crypt, and did that which caused his name to be stricken from all monuments and records. Then it slept in the ruins of that evil fane which the priests and the new pharaoh destroyed, till the delver's spade once more brought it forth to curse mankind. We get a lot of name dropping here, so let's go through the whole thing. Yugoth. We find out that the artifact was created on Dark Yugoth. Yugoth is a fictional planet that sits at the edge of our solar system. It is basically a new name for the former planet known as Pluto. It is also mentioned in other stories of Lovecraft and later other authors. There are many interesting things about this planet. It is described as a stop-off point for the Great Old Ones when they had their journey to Earth, but most importantly, it is the planet in our solar system where the Migo live and have their cities and, all their fungal stuff. See the Whisper in Darkness and Fungi from Yugoth for more information. Definitely gonna do Whisper in Darkness, it's one of my favorite stories. And then there are the Old Ones. The Old Ones are an ancient race of gods or intensely powerful superhuman beings. Cthulhu is, for example, an Old One. You can find more about the Old Ones in my iceberg video. So the trapezohedron was crafted on Yugoth by the Old Ones. So on that strange planet by gods. And then the Crinoid things from Antarctica came and put it in this little cute box. With this phrase, the Crinoid things, Lovecraft is actually talking about the eldritch things, which is an ancient species of aliens that used to have a civilization on Earth. They are mostly known from his magnum opus At the Mountains of Madness. And then eons later, the Serpent Men of Valusia, found it in the ruins, the ruined leftovers from the Elder Things civilization. Now, the Serpent People weren't actually invented by Lovecraft, but they were invented by other authors from his cycle, and he expanded on it, especially in The Nameless City. Serpent People are what you think they are. They are serpenty dudes. They're serpents who are also humanoid. And then the artifact found its way into the hands of humanity, of Lemurians to be exact. Lemuria is kind of like Atlantis. It's a fictional landmass where humans dwelled in ancient times in a civilization that's, more powerful than ours is today. And the name comes actually where you think it comes from, Lemuria. It comes from lemurs, the cute monkey species. It is because their fossils are present in Madagascar, down there, the island, South Africa, that thing, big island, and also in India. And then zoologist Philip Skettler came along and he combined the whole thing into, well, there must have been a connection because there's no lemurs in between, they're just in these two regions, with which he was actually right, which is, it's a long story, I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but long story short, then occultists and conspiracy theorists, they propagated this idea, and some people still think that it existed somewhere in the ocean over there. It's even on the coat of arms of the British Indian Ocean Territory. There, if you look at the coat of arms, there is the motto, In tutela nostra Lemuria, which is Latin for Lemuria is in our charge or in our trust. So, side note here, this is all a big source or interwoven with Graham Hancock things, is true, in his horribly researched show, Ancient Apocalypse. If you want to know more why Graham Hancock is such a clown, just watch Mini Minutes Man series of where he debunks the whole show. There's also a really cool video from Trey the Explainer where he explains how Lovecraft is actually the root of why people nowadays think that there's lizard people, when we come back to the snake people thing. So Lovecraft had so much influence and Graham Hancock is such a clown. But yes, it's insane. There are links to both of those videos or video series down in the description. I can highly recommend it. It's good, high quality video essays on YouTube. But yes, Lovecraft didn't believe any of this, but he included it in his mythology. And so the Lemurians, they picked up the trapezohedron, and then somehow it got to the people of Atlantis. And then, Minoan fisherman, he found it in the water, and then it got into the hands of Pharaoh Neferka. And that dude is not a real pharaoh. It didn't really exist. It's a made-up pharaoh, also known as the Black Pharaoh. It's an avatar of Nyarlathotep. And he appears in many Lovecraftian works, by himself and from the circle of Lovecraft. And the pharaoh built a dark tomb for it and used the artifact and its powers, for his horrible plans, like a villain. And then that tomb was destroyed. And millennia later, The archaeologists found it in Egypt and stole it, because that's what they did. They didn't rescue the artifacts, they stole them. And then he brought it to Western society. But because back then archaeologists mostly grave robbers. There are still people in the world who have to fight with our museums in the West that maybe we can give them back their dead so they can give them a proper burial again, because we took them from their graves, which is insane. We also find out that Blake starts being afraid of the monster that lives in the darkness. But the street lights between him and the church, they form a sort of barrier that it will not be able to cross, because again, as you remember, it's vulnerable to light. I think this is really cool because HP packs so much lore into these just 2 paragraphs that I read to you, and the whole idea of an artifact that is over the course of millions of years lost and found and used and abused by different species and civilizations. And there's a genie or a demon in there. It's delicious, it's so rich. It is now early June. The newspapers start telling the same story that Blake writes in his diary, because since his visit, the inhabitants of Federal Hill have become nervous. There are stirrings and bumpings in the night. Something scrapes inside of the steeple. Priests are called to help. Something is waiting at the door, waiting for it to be dark enough so it can venture outside. Blake writes of his remorse. He feels a responsibility to go back and bury the horrible shining trapezohedron. But he also has this urge, this fascination, to go back there and gaze again into the cosmic secrets of the glowing stone. He even dreams about it. It is July 17th. Our protagonist is in horror, as every day he read about the rumors concerning Federal Hill and its dark church in the press. But on this morning, the journal states not rumors, but facts. During the night, a thunderstorm caused a blackout for a whole hour in the lighting system of the city. The whole district around the church had gone mad with fright. Those living near the dreaded church had sworn that the thing in the steeple had taken advantage of the street lamp's absence and gone down into the body of the church, flopping and bumping around in a viscous, altogether dreadful way. Toward the last, it had bumped up to the tower, where there were sounds of the shattering of glass. It could go wherever the darkness reached, but light would always send it fleeing. I think you can see where this is going. When the current blazed on again, there had been a shocking commotion in the tower, for even the feeble light trickling through the grime-blackened louver-boarded windows was too much for the thing. It had bumped and slithered up into its tenebrous steeple just in time, for a long dose of light would have sent it back into the abyss whence the crazy stranger had called it. During the dark hour, praying crowds had clustered round the church in the rain, with lighted candles and lamps, somehow shielded with folded paper and umbrellas, a guard of light to save the city from the nightmare that stalks in darkness. Once those nearest the church declared, the outer door had rattled hideously. I really love this part. I really love the picture of the locals, the Italians, all the families coming together with lanterns and candles and forming this sort of light wall around the church to protect themselves, of course, but also everybody in the city. And all of this in the middle of a thunderstorm. This is, I think, one of the few beautiful and heartwarming scenes in all of Lovecraft. Maybe it's the only one, actually. It's almost romantic. I really mean it. Against all warnings, 2 reporters enter the church. They are met by a weird stench. There are yellow stains and patches of charring. As they walk up the spiral stairs, they hear a scraping sound from the steeple. They describe the inside of the tower mostly the same as Robert had experienced it during his visit. There is just less dust and cobwebs, everything has been swept, and there are of course more stains and charring up there. There is still the stone pillar, the chairs, but they do not mention the skeleton. What they do find is new and absolutely shocking to Blake. It's that 2 of the windows are broken, while the other ones, well, it seems like someone or something tried to restore the tower to absolute blackness with cloth and bunches of horsehair and linings. But whoever did that has been interrupted. The reporters venture further up. One of them even goes up the ladder, and the ladder also has yellow stains and charring. He goes so far as to open the trapdoor at the top. The reporter shot a feeble flashlight beam into the black and strangely fetid space. He saw nothing but darkness, and an heterogeneous litter of shapeless fragments near the aperture. They write in the bulletin, their paper, that all of this is just a hoax. Somebody had gone up there to play with the superstitions of the local folk, spreading charring and color and smell and do the whole thing with the windows. Later, the police sends in 3 officers to confirm the reports, and the first 3 they just evade the order, which is hilarious. Then they send a 4th one, and he actually does it very reluctantly, and he just comes out very shortly after he went in, and he's like, they were right, there's nothing there to add, it's all good, it's just a hoax, let's just leave this, go home, eat donuts, whatever. Now, the newspapers, they're having a laugh at this, but Blake is an absolute terror, as we can read in his diary. He needs to do something about this. During thunderstorms, he calls the electric light company and frantically asks if they have any precautions against the blackout. Blake is concerned. Why did the reporters find nothing of the metal box, the trapezohedron, the dead body? Who removed all of that? But most of all, Blake is concerned about his own well-being. He feels a connection to whatever is over there in the steeple, tugging at his will. The thing knows where to find him. He often just sits on his desk and stares absently at the church in the distance. His dreams are terrible, and during one night, he wakes up and realizes he's fully dressed on the street on his way down the hill towards the church. The week following July 30 is recalled as the time of Blake's partial breakdown. He did not dress and ordered all his food by telephone. First of all, the audacity, the absolute audacity of this incel horror boy to roast me in an almost 100-year-old story like that. There's no need for personal attacks here, HP, okay? I might do that sometimes, okay? That is very healthy to just not dress and order food every day. I guess people never change. It's called self-care, buddy. Visitors remarked the cords he kept near his bed, and he said that sleepwalking had forced him to bind his ankles every night with knots which would probably hold or else waken him with the labor of untying. In his diary, he told of the hideous experience which had brought the collapse. After retiring on the night of the 30th, he had suddenly found himself groping about in an almost black space. All he could see were short, faint, horizontal streaks of bluish light, but he could smell an overpowering feature and hear a curious jumble of soft, furtive sounds above him. Whenever he moved, he stumbled over something, and at each noise there would come a sort of answering sound from above. A vague steering, mixed with the cautious sliding of wood on wood. So at the end of July, it finally happens. Robert Blake, as he sleepwalks, gets semi-conscious in absolute darkness. Stumbling through the dark and being overpowered by a stench, he experiences soft noises that come from above him. Remember that. For every stumble over something, there is an answering sound coming from above. Like the sound that wood on wood makes, a stirring motion. And sometimes there are short streaks of light that come through. Still not completely aware of the situation, our protagonist tries to find a way in the dark. He climbs up a ladder that is built inside a wall, mind you, a ladder that is built inside the wall. Once at the top, the smell gets worse, and now there is a searingly hot wind. Robert Blake witnesses before his eyes a kaleidoscopic range of phantasmal images, all of them dissolving at intervals into the picture of a vast, unplumbed abyss of night, wherein whirled suns and worlds of an even profounder blackness. He thought of the ancient legends of ultimate chaos, at whose center sprawls the blind idiot god Azathoth, lord of all things, encircled by his flopping horde of mindless and amorphous dancers, and lulled by the thin, monotonous piping of a demoniac flute, held in nameless paws. So he gazes into another dimension and he sees Azathoth. Azathoth, for those who don't know, is one of the most central gods to Lovecraft's mythology. The god is mostly known as nuclear chaos, or the demon sultan, or the blind idiot god, or as the lord of all things. Azathoth is the supreme god. We don't know how Lovecraft exactly came up with it, but in 1919 he wrote a note to himself stating simply, Azathoth, hideous name. I love this. Imagine just going about your day and your mind just goes, Gremleg, this name is disgusting, I have to write it down to remember how bad the name is that I just came up with. Lovecraft started working with the name and the creature. He even tried writing a novel titled Azathoth, but eventually he failed with that novel. In the end, HBL finally gave the god's first appearance in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath in 1927. Azathoth is at the center of our universe. He or it or whatever they bears no finite description, as everybody who witnesses this god experiences something different. If you ever witness a statue or an idol or similar of Azathoth, you might see a bivalvular shell supported on many pairs of flexible legs. From the half-open shell rose several jointed cylinders, tipped with polypus appendages, and in the darkness inside the shell, I thought I saw a horrible, bestial, mouthless face, with deep sunken eyes and covered with glistening black hair. That was from the insects from Shagai, which he didn't wrote himself. Or what you could also witness is a pale grey shape, expanding and crinkling, which glistened and shook gelatinously as still moving particles dropped free, but it was only a glimpse. The descriptions I just gave you are of his only well-known avatar, so again, an avatar, not the god itself. How the insects from Shagai worship the god. The god itself exists since the beginning of time, in a state that is beyond space and time, to be more specific. The body is larger than a star, and there are other beings that are floating around him. They're piping, they're drumming and dancing in this rhythmical fashion to keep the idiot god asleep. The reason why they want to keep him asleep is when Azathoth wakes up, the whole universe just ends. Whenever the god almost wakes up, but then falls back asleep, there is a catastrophic cataclysm that's happening somewhere in the universe. And much like Cthulhu, although he is sleeping, his psyche is infecting and manipulating whatever it can, influencing the humans who have a mind that is too frail and too open. And also, if you witness the god directly, you just explode instantly in a painful, very bad way. Just so you know, so don't go searching anywhere near the center of the universe or Google Azathoth. I warned y'all, so don't go on the Azathoth face reveal stream. So that is what Robert Bloch basically gets. It's a glimpse, it's a vision, it's as much and a bit more as a human can bear of Azathoth. But he is ripped from this trance by loud exploding noises and realizes the horrible position he's in. While he was sleepwalking, our protagonist actually wandered into the church, as you can guess, and up the dark steeple. He's screaming in terror and he finally wakes up. That sound that woke him up are actually fireworks. The Italians are having a celebration to their patron saints at this day, by coincidence. And I believe that this is crucial to Robert's survival, as the light from the fireworks is probably the only thing that keeps the hunter from coming down the tower and, snatch his nilly-white ass. Also, a cool observation that I made is the following. Let me read to you this part again. All he could see were short, faint, horizontal streaks of bluish light, but he could smell an overpowering feature and hear a curious jumble of soft, furtive sounds above him. Now, isn't that exactly just the sound and light of fireworks? The short, bright explosions that cause these slices of light to shine through the narrow windows into the church, the windows that have these small wooden boards to block most of the light, but not all. The explosions that are literally above him in the sky. I think this is really neat. I think this is cool how he interweaves reality and this dreamlike state and the visions. Now Robert, he's awake, and of course he just bolts. He runs down the staircase, through the cobweb church and basement, climbs out the window and races home through the streets. In the morning, Blake wakes up, lying on the study floor, bruised and battered. His clothes and hair are covered in cobwebs. There's dust, there's dirt. But there is something strange. His outer clothing bears an evil smell, a feature, and his hair has been badly scorched. It was then that his nerves broke down. Thereafter, lounging exhaustedly about in a dressing gown, he did little but stare from his west window, shiver at the threat of thunder, and make wild entries in his diary. Now, we get to the final day of Robert Bloch. It's just before midnight on August 8th. There is a great thunderstorm that finally breaks over the city. Repeatedly, lightning bombards the whole town, and the rain just pours down on the streets of Providence. The accompanying barrage of thunder keeps the citizens awake. Blake is in his home. It's now 1 a.m. He records, everything minutely in the diary. A chaotic mesh of often undecipherable hieroglyphs tell their own story of his despair and madness. In the diary, a chaotic mesh of often undecipherable hieroglyphs tell their own story of his despair and madness. In utter panic, he calls the company responsible for the city lights again, but the telephone line is out of service for safety reasons. So to conserve everything as much as they can, they just turn down the telephone line because they can spare that at least. Robert has to keep it dark inside so he can see out the window and watch over the city. He sits at his desk, stares into the distance. Hastily, the artist writes down an entry from time to time, so that detached phrases such as, "The lights must not go," "It knows where I am," "I must destroy it," and "It is calling to me, but perhaps it means no injury this time," are found scattered down 2 of the pages. At 2:12 a.m., the powerhouse records state that the lights finally go out. The whole city goes dark. Blake simply states in his diary, "Lights out. God help me." On Federal Hill, the situation intensifies. Groups of locals patrol the square and alleys around the evil church. They carry umbrellas, crucifixes, charms, candles, flashlights, oil lamps, everything that makes a little light. Even if it's just a little, they give thankful praise and blessings to the flashes of lightning. But then the weather changes. The lightning storm dies down, but the wind gets stronger, blowing out most of the candles. The Italians call upon Father Merluso from a neighboring church, and he comes hastily, throwing any kind of Christian warding spell he can at the hateful building. The rattling and scraping sounds in the tower are growing and growing. It is now 2:35 a.m. in the middle of the night. For whatever happens next, we have the testimony of the priest I mentioned before, a highly reliable policeman officer named William J. Monahan, who was part of the crowd, and the crowd itself, 70 to 80 people who were gathering around the church at this time. Of course, nothing can be proven to be supernatural. The phenomenon can surely be explained away. Who knows what chemical processes can build up in an old and badly aired church? There's gases, and there's paint, and there's all other kinds of substances that surely lead to something peculiar if left to themselves over the decades, right? Or maybe it was just another hoax, charlatanry, by someone who knows how impressionable the superstitious locals are. The phenomenon itself lasted for only 3 minutes. Now, in the passage I'm about to read, there's a word I had to look up myself. It's loverboarding. It's basically a cover, it's what I described before. It's the cover, that wooden frame with slight spaces that have tiny bit of light coming through. The floors aren't blocking it off like this, like this, like all the boards like this, but they're all tilted a bit, so a bit of light comes through vertically, 45-degree angle. So there are tiny spaces so that a bit of light can come through. It started with a definite swelling of the dull fumbling sounds inside the Black Tower. There had for some time been a vague exhalation of strange evil odors from the church, and this had now become emphatic and offensive. Then at last there was a sound of splintering wood, and a large heavy object crashed down in the yard beneath the frowning easterly facade. The tower was invisible now that the candles would not burn. But as the object neared the ground, the people knew that it was the smoke-grimed louver boarding of the tower's east window. Immediately afterward, an utterly unbearable fetor welled forth from the unseen heights, choking and sickening the trembling watchers, and almost prostrating those in the square. At the same time, the air trembled with a vibration as of flapping wings, and a sudden east-blowing wind, more violent than any previous blast, snatched off the hats and wrenched the dripping umbrellas of the crowd. Nothing definite could be seen in the candleless night, though some upward-looking spectators thought they glimpsed a great spreading blur of denser blackness against the inky sky, something like a formless cloud of smoke that shot with meteor-like speed towards the east. That was all. The watchers were half numb with fright, awe, and discomfort, and scarcely knew what to do, or whether to do anything at all. Not knowing what had happened, they did not relax their vigil, and a moment later they sent up a prayer as a sharp flash of belated lightning, followed by an ear-splitting crash of sound, rent the flooded heavens. Half an hour later the rain stopped, and in 15 minutes more the street lights sprang on again, sending the weary, bedraggled watchers relievedly back to their homes. So, long story short, the Haunter of the Dark explodes out of the steeple and makes its way across the city. You already know where he's headed. Shortly after there is a final explosion of light. Then the rain dies off, and the city lights come back on. Everybody is relieved. Well, almost everybody, as you can guess. There's one person who's not. On the next day, the newspapers report only few details about the happenings of the night. Apparently, the anomaly that happened at Federal Hill had even stronger ramifications to the west. Here on College Hill, something crashed down, awaking everybody. Of those who were already awake, only a few saw the anomalous blaze of light near the top of the hill, or noticed the inexplicable upward rush of air, which almost stripped the leaves from the trees and blasted the plants in the gardens. It was agreed that the lone sudden lightning bolt must have struck somewhere in this neighborhood, though no trace of its striking could afterward be found. A youth in the Tau Omega fraternity house thought he saw a grotesque and hideous mass of smoke in the air, just as the preliminary flash burst. But his observation has not been verified. All of the few observers, however, agree as to the violent gust from the west and the flood of intolerable stench which preceded the belated stroke, whilst evidence concerning the momentary burned odor after the stroke is equally general. So during the few minutes of absolute darkness, something made its way from the church across the sky to College Hill, leaving a trail of smoke and stench. These details are discussed very carefully as they appear to be connected to the mysterious death of Robert Blake. As they walk past his house in the morning, students from the Psi Delta house notice a blurred white face at the westward window. When they realize that he hasn't moved when they walk past again in the evening, they call the authorities. The rigid body sat bolt upright at the desk by the window, and when the intruders saw the glassy bulging eyes and the marks of stark convulsive fright on the twisted features, they turned away in sickening dismay. Shortly afterward, the coroner's physician made an examination, and despite the unbroken window, reported electrical shock or nervous tension induced by electrical discharge as the cause of death. The hideous expression he ignored altogether, deeming it a not improbable result of the profound shock is experienced by a person of such abnormal imagination and unbalanced emotions. He deduced these later qualities from the books, paintings, and manuscripts found in the apartment, and from the blindly scrawled entries in the diary on the desk. Blake had prolonged his frenzied jottings to the last, and the broken pointed pencil was found clutched in his spasmodically contracted right hand. Most of what our protagonist wrote in his diary at the end is unreadable. There are many speculations as to what happened and what ended the young artist. The box and the trapezahedron are being thrown into the deepest channel of Narragansett Bay. Now let me read to you the final entries of Robert Blake's diary. Lights still out. Must be 5 minutes now. Everything depends on lightning. Jedith granted will keep up. Some influence seems beating through it. Rain and thunder and wind deafen. The thing is taking hold of my mind. Trouble with memory. I see things I never knew before. Other worlds and other galaxies. Dark. The lightning seems dark and the darkness seems light. It cannot be the real hill and church that I see in the pitch darkness. Must be retinal impressions left by flashes. Heaven grant the Italians are out with their candles if the lightning stops. What am I afraid of? Is it not an avatar of Nyarlathotep who in antique and shadowy Chem even took the form of man? I remember you Goth, and more distant Shagai, and the ultimate void of the black planets. The long winging flight through the void cannot cross the universe of light. Recreated by the thoughts caught in the shining trapezahedron, sent it through the horrible abysses of radiance. My name is Blake, Robert Harrison Blake, of 620 East Knapp Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am on this planet. Azathoth, have mercy. The lightning no longer flashes. Horrible. I can see everything with a monstrous sense that is not sight. Light is dark and dark is light. Those people on the hill guard candles and charms. They're priests. Sense of distance gone. Far is near and near is far. No light, no glass. See that steeple, that tower. Window can hear. Roderick Usher. Am mad or going mad. The thing is stirring and fumbling in the tower. I am it and it is I. I want to get out. Must get out and unify the forces. It knows where I am. I am Robert Blake, but I see the tower in the dark. There is a monstrous odor, senses transfigured, boarding at that tower window, cracking and giving way. Yangaige. I see it coming here. Hellwind, Titan Blur, Black Wings. Yoxothoth, save me. The three-lobbed burning eye. That's the Hunter of the Dark. So in case you haven't seen it, this is the shirt that we have for this video. It's the Haunter of the Dark. It's a bit more of a cuter design than what we have had so far. The quality is really nice. And here in the back we also have the cool new logo. And Fanny, or Franziska from Fannstuff, she made this, she designed it. It was kind of a similar process than with the Wendigo. It was, hey, this is the story, you want to make a shirt, I'll pay you, and then we divide whatever comes in from the profits. And then instead of having a talk of, hey, let's sit together, she was like, hey, I kind of already did a thing, and it's this, and it's really cool. So you have the Haunter of the Dark in the back with the 3 eyes, and you have the church. There's bats everywhere. They could be bats, they could also be the Haunter. Yeah, the church is really creepy, and it's I don't know why, but it gives me more of an Asian vibe, the design. It's cute, but it's also a bit creepy. It's perfect for spooky season that's coming up. And yeah, the quality is really nice. You have the logo in the back. A friend of mine designed that. It's Finn. I'll also link him in the description. Franziska, she's an artist. I've known her also for a couple of years. She's also a photographer. Here you can see some of her work as well. As you can see, she does a range of stuff. She does like creepy things. She does manga and comic. She also does these mandala artworks that I really like. That was actually the first thing that I saw her do, and I really liked it. She had these big canvases on her Instagram with these mandalas, and it's something I really like, you know, because I like Jung and I like psychedelics, and I like, maybe not psychedelics, but I like Jung and I like psychedelic art, and it's really deep. And yeah, I really dig this black and white design. With this one we decided not to go for any color because it's the Haunter of the Dark, and black and white have such a deep meaning in the story, with the wall of light that kind of separates him from the Haunter. Yeah. I hope that you like it, and if you buy it, then you will support me and you will support a really cool local artist. And it will make sure that more cool videos will come here in the future. So also important, there are 2 stores. There's one for USA and then there's one for EU. So please click the respective shop, because otherwise you will just pay a lot in shipping fees. There will be standard versions, there will be different versions of the shirt, you know, premium men, premium women is what they call it. There's one with the logo in the back and not with the logo in the back. I also added a new Wendigo one with the logo in the back because I really like it. There's also an oversized version because Franziska really likes oversized shirts, and so we took that one. There's also the cup here again. Yes, I really like that we are getting our own covers or illustrations of all these tales, and then you can actually collect that. I really hope that you horror enthusiasts get your kick out of those artworks. I really like to take my own unique look at this story and not just tell the story, because we have that on YouTube a lot, but you know, talk about it, give cool side facts, give my own interpretation, especially in a personal and psychological and emotional level, or historical. And then it's really important to me to find an artist that then combines that into an artwork, because with this one you have the church that is really dark, and then the Haunter that is actually white. The eyes are black except for the 3rd eye. It's really cool. Yeah, if you want it, check it out. It's not that expensive. Yeah, it will support an artist and yours truly. Hey kids, we're back at the studio. There's like, the space I have here is like 1 meter between me and the desk, and then half a meter or a bit more. It's like the whole thing is like 2 meters, maybe a bit more, by your circumstances. Okay, so let's go through what we just read, what we just talked about. I think I'll start with the coolest thing in the whole story, which is Nyarlathotep. Maybe not the coolest thing, but one of the most important things. Now here's the thing, I really want to talk about Nyarlathotep and his connection to the story, especially since he's already been present in Rats in the Walls, if those of you who watched the video. It was my first video actually. So I felt like dedicating some time to this eldritch god/being, and then I realized, wait, Lovecraft actually wrote a very short story called Nyarlathotep, so you know, why not start there? It's only a couple of pages long, so without further ado, let me give you a little bonus story added to The Haunter of the Dark. Nyarlathotep by H.P. Lovecraft, written in December 1920. Now here's a short disclaimer. I am mostly gonna read actually the whole story since it's so short, and then just give you some side notes and commentary and summarizations from time to time. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the audience void. What a badass preface, right? The story plays in a time after a crisis or multiple crises in a society. There is tension, there is political tension, and there is social tension in the air. And it is argued that this season that is talked about is the later of 1919. You know, maybe after World War I and after the Spanish flu epidemic. Science is back then actually in this array of what Einstein is postulating. There is actually also a heat wave that is costing the lives of hundreds of people back then in New England, which is the home of Lovecraft, and New York, which is a place that he hated a lot. Oh wait, this is actually the same stuff that we are going through right now, 100 years later. Amazing. And now, to all of this bad sauce that's the setup for the story, there is a new, strange, and dangerous vibe added to. A vibe of physical danger. A danger widespread and all-embracing. Such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces, and whispered warnings and prophecies, which no one dared consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses between the stars swept chill currents that made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demonic alteration in the sequence of the seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were unknown. I really like this part. You see, back then, end of 1910s and beginning of 1920s, we were very much post-Christianity. We were very much on the we ended God thing that Nietzsche postulated. Let me quote Nietzsche actually. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? There's actually a cool song by Heaven Shall Burn called Murderers of All Murderers, where they quote actually mostly that part. So for those of you who do not know Nietzsche, or who just think that the God is dead quote is some edgelord atheism bullshit, here's what it means, or is mostly attributed to mean, because it's very deep. In the past few centuries, with progress in the sciences and changes in society, Western culture has more and more dropped the Christian values that it has carried so long with it and that have carried the society for such a long time, and which were at the core of society, right? Values like every human being is precious, no matter what they have done or who they are. Of course, there's the discussion of who we consider a human being with all the slavery and all the horrible things happening, but at least there was the idea that humans are valuable. And so with Western culture dropping these values more and more, the whole morality system is bound to collapse with it, the whole Christian morality system. God and religion, who are omnipresent in society and everyday doings, are suddenly questioned. And they're questioned on every level. God is transformed from God, the almighty being, into an idea or a story. And God himself, he dies as an almighty fact. And that, as Nietzsche correctly predicted, will lead then to the horrible, horrible, horrible bloodbaths of the 20th and 21st century. Look, I'm sorry, I can't open the whole Nietzsche can of worms, the whole truth bombing in this whole video. I hope you get the gist. There's so much that you can read into if you want to. So what you need to know is there is a change coming, if you want it or not. And with it, a hell of atrocities. That is what happened back then in real life, and what is happening in the story.
Time is a flat circle.
I said, Nietzsche, shut the fuck up. Put it down!
And it was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, none could tell, but he was of the old native blood, and looked like a pharaoh. The fellahin knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on this planet. So the fellahin are farmers or rural folk from the Middle East, and they instinctively feel and hear in the story and react to the god's power. And about the 27 centuries, S.T. Yoshi, you know, who's our main Lovecraft background checker, he did the math, and this places the god to have slept or endured or whatever he did, right? The 22nd dynasty of Egypt lasted from 943 to 730 BCE. And then he slept from that period until the 1920s. That period is also called the Middle Intermediate period, that 22nd dynasty. But we also know that the god appeared in other times in between. He didn't sleep or was absent the whole time. So maybe there was just a 2.7 thousand year rest at some point in his career or his lore. There are different guesstimations and calculations that place him in different eras in Egypt. So Yoshi states that Lovecraft was implying a connection between Nyarlathotep and the mysterious Sphinx. These Sphinx, the statue. And so God Dude has a connection to Egypt. Let's just keep it there. I think that is what he's mainly known for culturally. That is what culture he's connected to is Egypt. Nyarlathotep, it sounds very Egyptian. And then he comes to the West, the modern West, of course. And on his way, he does wondrous things. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal, and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep, and shuddered. Those of you who know Nikola Tesla will know what's up. Although we have no actual proof, there are several historians who cite Tesla as one of the inspirations for Nyarlathotep and what he's doing here in this paragraph and in the others. Tesla was a kind of wunderkind, a prodigy of electrical engineering and all over a super interesting person. He did shows back then where he presented his discoveries and baffled the audience. Inventions like the Tesla coil that can pump electricity through a room without touching anything, like through the air basically. And these shows would terrify and overwhelm the audience. It would leave a big impression on everybody. A thing that I would like to point out here is that in cosmic horror, you rarely see magic, or you actually see magic that isn't magic. There is a famous quote by Arthur C. Clarke about all of this that is quoted a lot when talking about cosmic horror. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So basically what this says is there is no magic. There is just technology that is so far ahead of what is comfortable or reasonable to you that you have to call it magic because you can't comprehend it. You don't understand that that is a technology. You just think, oh, it's magic. Somebody does something and it just happens. And Nyarlathotep uses little tricks to blow everybody's minds. And their minds are indeed blown. And where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished. For the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters, gliding under bridges and old steeples, crumbling against the sickly sky. So the eldritch being is almost like a force of nature, and he is so intense that he leaves terror in his wake. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him, and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, that what was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy, and that in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from man that which had never been taken before, yet which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others saw not. I think that he's talking about the soul here, maybe. So a cool thing about this is that Lovecraft actually had a dream about this. This is such a meme that he's dreaming it up. On the 14th of December 1920, he wrote to a friend, his friend's name was Reinhard Kleiner, that his other friend, Samuel Loveman, would write to him in the dream the following. So he has two friends, Reinhard Kleiner and Samuel Loveman, and he writes in real life to Reinhard Kleiner that in the dream he had, Samuel Loveman would write him a letter. And the letter would say, "Don't fail to see Nyarlathotep if he comes to Providence. He's horrible, horrible beyond anything you can imagine, but wonderful. He haunts one for hours afterward. I am still shuddering at what he showed." So here I think we can all agree that there is a direct confirmation that Nyarlathotep is in actuality Fred Durst. Yeah, Lovecraft had the source for so much of his stuff in his dreams, it's really incredible. Lovecraft himself back then commented, "I had never heard the name Nyarlathotep before, but seemed to understand the allusion. Nyarlathotep was a kind of itinerant showman or lecturer who held forth in public halls and aroused widespread fear and discussion with his exhibitions. These exhibitions consisted of two parts. First, a horrible, possibly prophetic cinema reel, and later some extraordinary experiments with scientific and electrical apparatus. As I received the letter, I seemed to recall that Nyarlathotep was already in Providence. I seemed to remember that persons had whispered to me in awe of his horrors and warned me not to go near him. But Loveman's dream letter decided me. As I left the house, I saw throngs of men plodding through the night, all whispering affrightedly and bound in one direction. I fell in with them, afraid yet eager to see and hear the great, the obscure, the unutterable Nyarlathotep." That is one comment about what we read before, and another thing that I want to talk about is that things that are being thrown on the screen, he's obviously talking about cinema here. In 1920, a cool movie came out which is called Algol, which features an alien that comes to Earth. And the alien comes from the planet Algol, and the alien meets a coal miner, and it gives him a cool piece of technology. And this technology gives the miner an endless source of electrical or energy resource, mostly electrical energy. And the man then starts to get kind of corrupted by the device. He gives everybody free electricity, but it's not actually free, right? It's just free to him. He still takes power and then actually later whole countries in return because he gives the people the energy that they couldn't get otherwise. This isn't the end of the whole movie, but you can see already how electricity and aliens and corruption are all interlinked to Nyarlathotep. It's a hot autumn night when the protagonist joins a restless crowd to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and up the endless stairs into the joking room, and shadowed on a screen, I saw hooded forms amidst ruins and yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments. And I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. Then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood up on end, whilst shadows more grotesque than I can tell came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drave us all out, down the dizzy stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I never could be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swear to one another that the city was exactly the same and still alive. And when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again and laughed at the queer faces we made. So, regarding the yellow evil faces, it is unfortunately a very direct and racist connection to anti-Asian, especially anti-Japanese and Chinese sentiment of the time. Lovecraft wrote to his friends Galpin and Moe in September of 1919. I'm gonna read it to you because it's important, but fuck this, yeah. Here's the quote. "Orientals must be kept in their native East till the fall of the white race. Sooner or later a great Japanese war will take place, during which I think the virtual destruction of Japan will have to be effected in the interests of European safety. The more numerous Chinese are a menace of the still more distant future. They will probably be the next exterminators of Caucasian civilization, for their numbers are amazing. But all that is too far ahead for consideration today." Oh, Lovecraft, why? I got it. No. This isn't booze, but I wish it was. Why? Why you gotta be so goddamn racist? And also, there will for sure be somebody in the comments saying, Lovecraft was actually not racist. At the end of his life, he was married to a Jewish woman, and also... Okay, bro, show me the letters. We have so many letters from him. We don't have all the letters, we don't have all the documents, but we have many of them. And we have many of them where he shows us his personal beliefs and his ideas, and he's very honest, right? And even in the end, his letters and ideas and what he writes is still as racist as a Republican governor in the backrooms of a county fair. That is how it is. Show me the letters, right? If you wanna convince me that Lovecraft wasn't racist, oh my god, there was somebody in the comments. I hope he was a troll, but like media literacy is at the end of everything right now. But this person argued with another person in the comments of my last video, I think it was the last video or maybe one of the iceberg videos, that Lovecraft wasn't racist. Like, he read everything and Lovecraft wasn't racist. And like, just read the horror at Red Hook. Read... It's so racist, man. It's so racist. It's just... I hope that person was a troll, because otherwise I can't explain how... No. Just no. Okay. Back to the yellow faces. So back then movies were still almost exclusively in black and white. So Nyarlathotep here might actually have another technological marvel up his sleeve, right? As he can show movies in color. Or maybe he's just showing racist propaganda to intensify the political toxicity so he can profit from the social conflict. He wouldn't be the first to do that, would he? So the protagonist in the story, he is a bit of an edgelord, right? And he keeps his cool and he tries to debunk the eldritch god and his wonders. And so they are being thrown out by Nyarlathotep back into the hot deserted streets. But the street lights go out. And in the greenish moonlight, they find that the city is in ruins. Once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways had run. And again, we saw a tram car, lone, windowless, dilapidated and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan. Another filled down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with a laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked toward the open country, and presently felt a chill which was not of the hot autumn, for as we stalked out on the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed, as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I had heard the reverberation of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight. As if beckoned by those who had gone before, I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. It appears like the whole crowd has been transported into the future. The whole city is now in ruins. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in hands that are not hands and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brush the pallid stars and make them flicker low. Beyond the world's vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space and reach up to dizzy vacuo above the spheres of light and darkness. and through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums, and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time. The detestable pounding and piping, whereunto dance, slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly, the gigantic, tenebrous ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles, whose soul is Nyarlathotep. So in the future city where they are, Nyarlathotep has now corrupted all of reality into his own vision. And the music, the dancing, the drumming, the piping, that is all again centered around keeping Azathoth at bay. It's a cool story, right? So, now let's talk about everything. What is Nyarlathotep? What's also my beard? What is my beard doing? So what is Nyarlathotep? First of all, it's Lovecraft's first god. He invented himself, and he, they, it, Nyarlathotep, whatever. And Nyarlathotep appears in many of Lovecraft's stories. We have The Rats on the Walls, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, The Last Test, The Mound, Fungi from Yugoth, The Whisperer in Darkness, The Dreams in the Witch's House, The Shadow Out of Time, The Haunter of the Dark, and also The Man of Stone, which he wrote with Hazel Heald in 1932. What the hell is The Man of Stone? I swear, every time I do a video, I find 3 new Lovecraft stories I didn't know about, because he wrote them with or for somebody, he did the ghostwriting thing. He was really prolific. Just everything's hidden. So again, what is Nyarlathotep? One of his avatars is the Black Pharaoh, who's also known as Neferenka. And this dude was first mentioned in Lovecraft's The Outsider, which he wrote in 1921 and was published 5 years later. Let me read to you a passage from the Fungi from Yugoth concerning the god as well. I have it somewhere here actually. Fungi from Yugoth. And at the last, from inner Egypt came the strange dark one to whom the Fella spoke, that wild beasts followed him and licked his hands. Soon from the sea a noxious birth began, forgotten lands with weedy spires of gold. The ground was cleft, and mad auroras rolled down on the quaking citadels of man. Then, crushing what he chanced to mold in play, the idiot chaos blew earth's dust away. The idiot chaos, of course, being Azathoth. So the name Nyarlathotep itself apparently means something like the messenger or message, the message that is trusted by the gods. And here many literal scientists and people on Reddit and myself, we would say that Nyarlathotep is similar to a trickster god, like Loki. He's a manipulator. He's somebody who is close to civilization and who knows how to pull his strings. I think he's the god that's closest to civilization and to interacting with it. He possesses 1,000 forms, all different, all having different personalities, but they're not different variants of the same phenomenon. Like, they're not like tigers, for example, right? Where there are, I don't know how little there are left because we've decimated them so bad. But they're all doing their own thing, right? Like, each tiger is its own tiger. But with Nyarlathotep, they're all acting under one will. So he's sort of a puppet master. And then also, all of those avatars and forms are focused on chaos and destruction. So that's one of his names, right? The crawling chaos. And then one of his other names is the messenger. So the outer gods and Nyarlathotep have a special relationship in the mythos. Usually most of the gods don't have a particular specific relationship with each other, right? Some of them come together and spawn other gods, and some like, or most of the time dislike each other, as far as we can understand that as humans. But Nyarlathotep, he's our special boy. He seems like he's part of the outer gods, but he has a special role there. We don't know if he just represents them, you know, like an agent, or if he also controls them. He could be the collective avatar of the outer gods. You know, he could be their consciousness. You know, maybe he's their communicator to other species like humans. Maybe he's like the face of all the outer gods. Many of the gods and higher beings of the mythos are suspected to be just a specific form of Nyarlathotep, or that they are in cahoots with Nyarlathotep. Gods like Nodens or Lilith and Han and many more. I really recommend you here to check out Chaosium's Malleus Monstrorum for this. There is so much information about all the gods in there. It's really cool. I've shown it in the iceberg videos. There is an interpretation of this god being kind of the avatar of the other gods. That's why there are so many different faces to this horror. Because each of those is a different god. But isn't he then just an avatar and he himself doesn't exist, then, why is there a collective Nyarlathotep? So yeah, doesn't that make no sense at all? And that is, I guess, one of those cosmic horror things where it doesn't make sense because we cannot understand it, where it's all too interconnected. You have to choose in our logic between two things, but they can exist at the same time. It could also just be that he is the god with the easiest connections to our realm, and that he makes deals with the other gods to act out in their will, and then he also plays his own games with them, which then again is the trickster god part. And like a true trickster, he travels to a lot of races in all the dimensions, where then he communicates with those races, and then he probably makes them obedient or makes them follow his plans. And they may not even know that they follow his plans, or that it's him, that it's Nyarlathotep. He isn't, I'm sorry, I'm saying he all the time because the pharaoh is a male thing, but you can say she or it or they or whatever. He isn't found alone somewhere in space, or asleep in a sunken city, like Cthulhu. He always is where the people at. With humans, for example, he sometimes comes and he gives them power and then other favors to specific humans, and they will then make things worse for everybody and more chaotic for everybody else. Fritz Leiber, he's one of the fathers of the sword and sorcery genre, which is a very popular genre. If you don't know what it is, look it up. He proposed 3 interpretations of the character of Nyarlathotep. He was like, okay, what do we do with this? He was like, okay, I have 3 interpretations of how he appears here in the story. First idea is that he's the universe's mockery of man's attempt to understand the universe. The second idea is that he's the negative view of the commercial world, represented by Nyarlathotep's self-promotion and contemptuous attitude. And the third idea is that he's man's self-destructive rationality. And that, in my opinion, intertwines with the whole God is dead Nietzsche thing that I opened up in the beginning of the analysis part. We as humans have grown out of our protective shell called religion, and now we're exposed to all the horrors, right? So I guess now you have a better understanding of this giant of a god. There's so much more to talk about, but I hope that now you have an idea what Nyarlathotep is. Maybe. There's actually a big Call of Cthulhu campaign from Chaosium that many consider to be the best, or definitely one of the best campaigns. It's called Mask of Nyarlathotep, and each of the many forms that he has is one of his masks. So that's it. Now let's talk about the Haunter of the Dark, right? That's what we're here. A cool thing about these books by Chaosium, like the one back here, is that they have so much background information gathered from different Cthulhu Mythos authors and other short stories. And they actually have a small section in there about the Haunter of the Dark itself. Here's the description, I'm just going to read it to you. Somewhat resembles a gigantic bat, with great wings, trailing a mass of tentacles, all of which seem to composed of thick black smoke. Its only facial feature is a 3-lobed burning red eye, and other than its wings, it possesses no arms or legs. The 3 eye lobes, or just the 3 eyes, the whole thing, is also a big part of Tanabe's design of the creature, or of the being here. It's the Haunter of the Dark from Tanabe himself. And the story is called The Shining Trapezahedron, in German, Der leuchtende Trapezahedron. I don't know why they couldn't call it the Haunter of the Dark, just in German. They have to always give them horrible other names, because somebody needs to be creative and put himself in there. Buy it yourself and look it up, it's really cool. But there's other renditions where he has the 3 eyes, or it's just 3 eyes. The Haunter of the Dark here is also called the Father of all Bats. It is one of Nyarlathotep's oldest avatars, and it is known by many alien species. Now they also mention a second cult next to the Starry Wisdom Church that heeds the Haunter of the Dark. The Cult of the Sandbat is what it's called. Based in Australia, the Cult of the Sandbat is considered to have been rejuvenated in the early 20th century, originally believed to have existed in some form or other since the dawn of humanity. The cult had all but died out until an unnamed newcomer arrived to invigorate matters by broadening the cult's appeal and membership toward disenfranchised working-class Australians, and drawing in anyone, no matter their ethnicity. Twisting some of the Aboriginal Australian beliefs to better suit their needs, this newcomer incorporated elements of the mythology of the Sandbat, Hungry Wing, and Face Eater, equating these with the Haunter of the Dark. The cult is believed to operate out of the Northern Territory, but allegedly has members across the country. Let's talk about the artist and Nyarlathotep. I don't know if you know any artists personally, but being one myself, I know many. in my surroundings, and I know how frail we can be, and I'm not gonna lie, I've witnessed many of my friends in a state of a lack of mental health, also connected to their art. It's not fun. And there are actually so many examples of famous artists who crumbled under their own mental health issues. For example, there's Van Gogh, right? I hope I don't need to tell you who he is. Vincent van Gogh, he himself said, "I put my heart and my soul into my work and lost my mind in the process." Van Gogh would in his life develop something that might be called psychosis nowadays. Another example, maybe a bit less known but really vivid, is Louis Vane. Maybe you've seen him online. He started painting these cute cats, but sadly he suffered from schizophrenia, and as the illness progressed in his life, as he got more mad, you can see how his art changed in this super intense way, because it's still cats, but they look so different. They look insane. And then there's Richard Dad, who believed that he was possessed or at least influenced by the Egyptian god Osiris. He would then turn more and more aggressive over the course of his life, and then he would violently end his father's life later, and then he would also try to put a knife to a random tourist on the street, and then he was put in the mental hospital, and many of his most famous paintings actually were created in the mental hospital. There are of course artists where they had the mental health issues, but they were just less explosive on others. It would mostly affect themselves, like Ludwig van Beethoven, another Van, and he would lose almost all of his hearing, or I think all of his hearing, and then he became like apathetic and reclusive, and then he actually contemplated ending himself later. So, like, if you read about artists on Wikipedia, you can very often find the part that is the big mental health section, right? Lovecraft himself, as you know, he was suffering from mental health issues, and I guess that's one of the things that people are aware of, that he was racist and that he didn't have all the marbles up there all the time. Not in a way that he was more crazy, but like, for example, that he hated himself all the time. You can watch the iceberg videos I did. I still need to continue the iceberg to find out more here. Another example that is also close to my taste next to Lovecraft is, I'm pretty sure you know the band Pink Floyd, right? One of their favorite songs of mine is Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the live version of course, because it's the best one from the Pulse album. And in this song, they sing about their founding member, Syd Barrett. Syd had spiraled more and more during his career, probably not only, but also because of drug use. At least let's say the drugs didn't help, probably. And he lost himself in the process and they had to continue without him. The list here goes on and on. Look up your favorite artists and you'll find them going to pieces. And then sometimes they manage to pick it up. Sometimes they don't manage to pick it up. It is, in my opinion, a quite dangerous trope of this artist that is mad, you know, the artist that is starving, who continually suffers. It makes too many artists, young and old, believe that pain isn't just part of life, that, you know, needs to be accepted, but also you need to learn how to have less pain. You know, accept the pain that you can't evade, and then lessen the pain that you can lessen. But then they believe that excessive suffering and the spiraling is essential to be creative and to be successful. Every year the family of arts and entertainment loses so many members to substance abuse, to dangerous behavior, to the whole cluster of mental health problems. And the protagonist in The Haunter of the Dark belongs to this type of artists who dwell on darkness. There's even the idea that much about the story is about mental health issues, or even the idea of ending yourself. Let me take you there. Not to ending yourself, but to this idea. The protagonist is already focused on negative material, right? He doesn't just produce dark art, but he also knows a lot about occultism and similar topics. He kind of withdraws himself to his small apartment to concentrate on the work, and then he spots the church in the distance, right? During the whole process. That's how the whole story starts. And it just doesn't get out of his head. The church on Federal Hill and its effect on Robert feels to me like it's a very good symbol for the black hole that can open up in your soul and just pull you in. You know, the room where he's working is aligned exactly towards the church in the distance. And there are so many rooftops up on Federal Hill, but only this building just takes hold of him and doesn't let go. And then he follows that call, he follows that pull, and it just gets worse. It wants more and more. It gets worse and worse from there. There's nothing good about the church. You know, the animals shun it, the plants shun it, the plants shun it. I think that really sticks out in the story. In there, there's only spiders and maybe rats. Maybe rats. And then in there, he finds a dark portal that leads to another dimension. And he stirs this violent supernatural spirit or force. He even visits this place in his sleep, right? He even goes to this place, figuratively and non-figuratively, in his sleep. It just gets worse and worse between him and the Dark Church. And Robert knows it's dangerous, that he's playing with fire here. But he can't stop, right? He could just, theoretically, he could just move away into a different country or a city. But he needs to stay. And then, when you take away the supernatural elements of the story, this could just very well be the story of a young artist who spirals, where there were visible signs in his actions to his surroundings, where he would act abnormally until one morning he's found deceased. It could just be the story of one of your friends who just crashed in the worst way. And as told in the story, the diary is kind of the only evidence for anything superstitious. Okay, so another topic while we're already there. Do you think that the Starry Wisdom Church is still active when the story takes place? Just with the part in the Wendigo here, I just can't shake this one part, right? Was one of these believers who, moved to fanatical extremes, threw into the bay the curiously angled stone and its strangely adorned metal box, found in the old church steeple, the black windowless steeple, and not the tower where Blake's diary said those things originally were. This, and then other parts, like the person that he talks to in the beginning who would later be found dead, I think, he burns himself. I can't look it up right now, but like in the beginning, right, it starts with this, he visits somebody in the city and then that guy ends. For after all, the victim was a writer and painter, wholly devoted to the field of myth, dream, terror, and superstition, and avid in his quest for scenes and effects of a bizarre spectral sort. His earlier stay in the city, a visit to a strange old man as deeply given to occult and forbidden lore as he, had ended amidst death and flame, and it must have been some morbid instinct which drew him back from his home in Milwaukee. Yeah, I think, right, the man dies. Right? Or is because he doesn't die by flame. So he consults somebody else about all of this happening and they die. And then it just feels to me like the cult never disbanded in the whole story. They might have just infiltrated higher places, so they gave the appearance that they disbanded. Maybe they're even in control of the power company, and they want Robert, you know, a person who stirred all their doings in the church, to be quiet forever. The only thing that is speaking against this theory is that the whole church is full of undisturbed cobwebs when Robert enters it for the first time. And if there is an active cult, that they would go in there and they would disturb the cobwebs as well. But he's going there in the dark, he doesn't even have any kind of light source, so he wouldn't see exactly what's going on there, right? The whole investigation could be corrupted by the cult. True Detective style. Flash Simulator did a video about True Detective, and he just titled it in the beginning. I think when the premiere was, it was just called The King in Yellow. I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna do a video about that. Why did this very successful, cool dude make a video about this before I got there? I'm just not as fast. But he didn't. He made one about the first season of True Detective, so it's still good. We're still going there to do The King in Yellow. Let's talk about some of the connections of Lovecraft's other stories, and of his friends, which are stories I like a lot. So, the Shining Terpizahedron is mentioned as having been created on the planet Yugoth. On Yugoth, we also have an outpost for the Mi-Go, which then is further explained in The Whisperer in Darkness, one of my favorite stories of his. The Shining Terpizahedron was treasured and placed in its curious box by the crinoid things of Antarctica. This suggests a connection with the elder things from At the Mountains of Madness. And here's a cool thing. Let me read to you a part from the story, The Mountains of Madness, which we're gonna do at some point eventually, because it's one of the best stories. But the video is gonna be freaking long. Yet according to certain carvings, the denizens of that city had themselves known the clutch of oppressive terror, for there was a somber and recurrent type of scene in which the old ones were shewn in the act of recoiling, affrightedly, from some object, never allowed to appear in the design, found in the great river and indicated as having been washed down through waving, wine-draped cycad forests from these horrible westward mountains. In the end of the story, At the Mountains of Madness, Danforth, one of the main characters, peeks over those horrible mountains and he turns mad. He's left in a state where he sometimes just babbles, certain words. He talks about eldritch things. He says several short phrases, and here's several of them that are interesting in connection to the Haunter of the Darkness. The wings and the eyes in the darkness. This just feels very Haunter of the Dark to me, knowing that the Trapezahedron was up there at some point. Down there, down South Pole, whatever. It would mean that the Elder Things did actually have the Shining Trapezahedron, and also that they had awakened the Haunter of the Dark. They didn't only use the tool and maybe use the Haunter, but they also awakened the Haunter in the negative sense, which could then actually have led to their destruction, right? And then there's the Serpent Man of Valusia, who also owned the Shining Trapezahedron during some of the long journey that this object had. They're from the stories of Robert E. Howard. And then there's Nephron Ka, who is the character who's also mentioned in The Outsider, right? Which is written by Lovecraft. He's a pharaoh who builds this special lightless crypt for the Trapezahedron, and the Haunter itself probably, to keep him there. And then this is followed by an act which caused his name to be stricken from all monuments and records. I don't know what that is. What that act is that he did. I would like to know. Maybe you know. Also, the whole story is a bit of a fuck you to the old gothic horror, where, for example, a cross or a holy water can defeat any demon, right? Because the Haunter just lives inside of a church. Now let's take a step back and let me tell you how the story was actually created. Robert Bloch, you probably heard the name already on my channel, he started off as a fan of Lovecraft. At one point, he asked HP via letter if it would be okay if he writes a story that features him as a character, and also if it would be okay if he kind of have that character end in a very horrible way. And Lovecraft, of course, he replied in a very actually cute and formal way. He gave Bloch his permission in a formal letter, and not only did he sign it himself, but he had fictional characters signed there as well, as a witness. So he had Abdul Al-Hazred, the mad author of the Necronomicon, Gaspard du Nord, Friedrich von Junst, who created the other evil book, the Unersprechlichen Kulten. He had the Jocho Lama from Leng. They all signed the permission letter as well. And then Robert Bloch, he wrote the Shambler from the Stars, which was very much to HP's delight. And then in return, as you might have already guessed, the character Robert Blake is based on Robert Bloch. So the fictional titles of his artworks and stories, if you remember the artist in the beginning, he creates dark fantasy, horror paintings and stories. And these were all actually based or influenced by things that Robert Bloch made. Then after Lovecraft died, Bloch would write a third story that concluded this trilogy. It's called The Shadow from the Steeple. Bloch and Lovecraft were actually kind of close friends in their lifetime, and Lovecraft became somewhat of a mentor to Bloch. Robert Bloch would then go on and become a famous worldwide writer. You actually probably all know a movie that was written by him. He wrote the original Psycho story, which would then be made into a film by Hitchcock. It's one of the most famous movies. To conclude this part about Robert Bloch, I think there's this part that's really funny. In the diary at the end, when Robert Blake writes down, rambles all the stuff that's going on before the Haunter gets him, he writes the following. He writes, "My name is Blake, Robert Harrison Blake of 620 East Knapp Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin." And that part was the actual address of Robert Bloch at the time. So our homeboy HP, he just doxed one of his buddies 360 no scope. Imagine being Bobby Big Bloch and you read that story and the whole time you're thinking, hell yeah, HP is so cool, he wrote a story about me, this is the best. Like I made a story about him, like a character with him, and then he wrote one with me. And then you're reading the final paragraph and like, yeah, that's how it ends, it's so cool. And then just you read your own address and you're like, HP, could you not tell everyone where I live? It's a bit much. Other than this, the story is also influenced by Lovecraft's own life in Providence. As I've already mentioned in the previous parts, there's an area around Federal Hill that was actually quite alive with Italian culture, and the only thing about this that Lovecraft was not alienated by was apparently their ice cream. He did not like their big festivities that were dedicated to their saints, their Catholicism, the very social life on the streets, you know, the very Mediterranean lifestyle. It was only the gelato that he liked. As I've mentioned before already, I think there's actually a very similar church that was then struck by lightning, which is much what happened in the story, if you remember. Now I want to know from you, what do you think about the Haunter of the Dark? Is it about an interdimensional demon, or is it about a young artist that's struggling and even succumbing to the darkness? Is there a cult heeding an actual supernatural horror? Or is Robert Bloch and his madness and depression the real Haunter of the Dark? What is the shining trapezahedron? What does it symbolize? And when the protagonist states in the end in a dying frenzy to his diary, "I am it and it is I," is he just mad, or has his soul fused with Nyarlathotep? Thank you all so much for watching. Igor loves you. Good night.